Welcome to this journey through one of the most troubling cases in Mississippi history. Before we start, I invite you to leave in the comments where you are watching from and the exact time you are listening to this narration. We want to know to what places and at what times of day or night these true accounts reach. In 1855, the Mississippi Delta stretched on forever under the heavy summer heat, where cotton fields whispered secrets that the wind carried over plantation lands. The Magnolia Ridge estate stood like a symbol of southern wealth, its white columns shining against Spanish moss that hung like funeral cloths from old oak trees. What happened inside those walls on the night of August 14th would forever mark the red clay soil of Tunica County. The bride was Charlotte Evangeline Whitmore, 23 years old, daughter of tobacco merchant Edmund Whitmore from Natchez. Her groom, plantation owner Nathaniel Augustus Peton, was 41. A widower whose first wife had died in childbirth 3 years earlier. The marriage had been set up through letters between their families, as was normal among Mississippi's wealthy landowners. What guests at that wedding feast could never guess was that they were attending their own funeral meal. If you're enjoying the story and want to help the channel with any amount, please support us by clicking the thanks button and donating whatever you wish. This really helps the channel keep sharing new stories. The investigation that came after would uncover a network of lies so complex that local officials struggled to figure out the truth. Court records from the Tunica County Courthouse, many damaged during the Civil War but partly saved in state archives, show a celebration that started with southern splendor and ended in terrible tragedy. Before the horror came to Magnolia Ridge, life on the plantation followed the usual patterns of the Antebellum South. Nathaniel Peton had inherited the estate from his father in 1848, along with almost 200 enslaved workers and 3,000 acres of good cotton land. The main house, built in Greek Revival style, had 12 rooms and a wide veranda that looked out over the Mississippi River. Neighbors called Peton a strict but fair master, though former slaves who spoke years later during Reconstruction described a very different man. Charlotte Whitmore arrived at Magnolia Ridge 2 weeks before the wedding with her personal maid and a trunk holding her trousseau. Local seamstresses had worked for months on her wedding gown, a beautiful piece of ivory silk with Belgian lace that cost more than most families earned in a year. Household staff said the bride-to-be was quiet and kept to herself, spending long hours in the mansion's library reading medical books that seemed odd for a woman of her class. Dr. Marcus Bogard, the plantation doctor who cared for both the Peton family and the workers, wrote in his journal that Miss Whitmore had unusual knowledge of herbs and their effects. She had asked for access to the plantation's medicinal garden, saying she wanted to study local plants for healing uses. This fact would become very important to investigators in the weeks after the wedding disaster. The morning of August 14th started clear and humid, with temperatures rising toward 90 degrees before noon. Wedding preparations had begun at dawn, with kitchen slaves making a feast for over 100 guests. The menu had roasted venison, honey-glazed ham, cornbread stuffing, butter beans, sweet potato pie, and different jellies and preserves from the plantation's orchards. Most important, there would be syllabub, a traditional southern wedding drink made with wine, sugar, and cream. Among the guests were important families from across the Delta area. The Ashfords came from their plantation near Vicksburg, the Caldwells traveled from Greenwood, and the powerful Morrison family journeyed from their estate outside Memphis. Local merchants, the Episcopal minister who would lead the service, and various business friends of the Peton family were also there. Each guest would later become part of the most confusing mass poisoning case in Mississippi's known history. The ceremony went smoothly. Reverend Samuel Hutchinson of St. Mark's Episcopal Church in nearby Clarksdale led the service in the plantation's formal parlor, since the summer heat made an outdoor event too hard. Witnesses said Charlotte looked pale but calm, though some noticed her hands shook when she said her vows. Nathaniel seemed sure and happy, sometimes putting a comforting hand on his bride's arm. After the ceremony, guests went to the dining hall for the wedding feast. The room was decorated with white roses and honeysuckle, and crystal chandeliers threw dancing light over everyone. Tables were heavy with food, and servants passed silver trays of syllabub, the traditional wedding toast drink that Charlotte herself had insisted on making, using her grandmother's recipe. The first sign something was wrong came about 30 minutes after the toast started. Mrs. Adelaide Morrison, wife of Memphis cotton broker James Morrison, suddenly grabbed her throat and started gasping. Soon, others had the same symptoms. Dr. Bogard, who was on his second glass of syllabub, felt his vision blur and his pulse become uneven. In his statement 3 days later, when he could speak again, he said the symptoms pointed to plant alkaloid poisoning. What happened next was a scene witnesses could hardly explain later. Guests fell all over the dining hall, some shaking hard while others just dropped to the floor. Reverend Hutchinson was found under the dessert table, his face a strange blue color. Young Thomas Ashford, only 19, was discovered in the garden after trying to make himself vomit. The plantation overseer, Daniel McKenna, who had not drunk the syllabub because of his Presbyterian views on alcohol, quickly told house servants to call every doctor they could find within 20 miles. By evening, 3 doctors arrived from nearby counties, but their attempts to help the sick guests mostly failed. Of the 87 people who drank the syllabub that night, 31 died before morning. Nathaniel Peyton was one of the first to die. His new wife found his body in their marriage room, where he had gone when symptoms grew bad. Charlotte's screams, heard through the house around midnight, brought servants running to the master bedroom. They saw the bride kneeling by her husband's bed, her white wedding gown stained with his blue. She said he had been very sick and begged her to help, but by the time she saw how serious it was, he was gone. Strangely, Charlotte showed no signs of poisoning, even though people had seen her drink during the toasts. When Dr. Bogard asked her, she said she only pretended to drink because she felt nervous about the wedding night and worried alcohol might upset her. This answer satisfied most people at first, but later it raised big questions with investigators. The days right after the tragedy were full of confusion. Surviving guests who could travel left Magnolia Ridge as fast as possible, many needing help from family or servants. The Caldwell family lost both parents, but their young twin daughters, too little for alcohol, lived. The Morrison family lost James and Adelaide, leaving their 3 children without parents. Local officials arrived the next morning, led by Sheriff William Crawford from the county seat at Hernando. He had handled some murders and fights common on plantations, but nothing like the number of deaths at Magnolia Ridge. His first report to the circuit court called the scene more like a battlefield than a wedding party. Dr. Edmund Hayes, a doctor from Memphis with knowledge of poisons, was called to check bodies and do what counted as forensic work in 1855 Mississippi. His findings, kept in county records, showed victims died from what he called vegetable poisoning, probably a plant-based alkaloid mixed into the syllabub. Symptoms matched several local toxic plants, like water hemlock and white snakeroot. The investigation changed direction when servants said Charlotte spent a lot of time in the kitchen that morning, saying she wanted to watch the syllabub being made. Kitchen staff told how she brought her own ingredients, including special honey from her family's bees in Natchez. Even more worrying, the head cook, an enslaved woman named Celia, said Charlotte wanted to be alone while mixing the final batch of the drink. When shown this, Charlotte kept saying she was innocent while showing deep sadness over her husband and others. She said being in the kitchen was to follow family tradition and make sure the syllabub was done right. The honey, she said, was a gift from her father to make the drink special, but Dr. Hayes checked Charlotte's things and found troubling items. Hidden in her travel trunk were dried plant parts he identified as water hemlock root, plus a mortar and pestle with bits of ground plant. There were also letters from her father showing the Whitmore family was in much worse money trouble than they told the Petons. The reason for the poisoning started to appear as officials looked deeper into the arranged marriage. Edmund Whitmore's tobacco business had failed for years from bad crops and growing debts. Marrying his daughter to Nathaniel Peyton meant not just higher social standing, but possible money rescue for his family. Under Mississippi law, Charlotte would get her husband's estate if he died without children from his first marriage. Investigators found Nathaniel's first wife died in childbirth, but the baby lived and was raised by relatives in New Orleans. This had been hidden from the Whitmores during talks, as Nathaniel worried it might change things. If Charlotte learned about the child, she would know her claim to the inheritance was not simple. The case turned again when Dr. Bogard was questioned more about Charlotte's plant interest. He said she asked exact questions about amounts and effects of toxic plants on people, She claimed to study old remedies for sickness, but her questions centered on plants that cause quick death in large doses. Sheriff Crawford found Charlotte had asked about the guest list, especially which families came, and if children would attend. When told most guests were adults and children would not drink alcohol, she seemed eased. This suggested she planned the poisoning to spare young ones while hitting adult witnesses hard. The strongest proof came from Reverend Hutchinson, who lived through the poisoning but stayed very sick for weeks. In his last clear moments, he wrote a short note describing Charlotte in the dining hall during the worst part. He said her actions looked strangely calm for someone seeing such horror. He wrote she moved among dying guests with what seemed like medical curiosity instead of sadness or shock. As the investigation went on, a clearer view of Charlotte's personality and reasons came out. Former slaves from the Whitmore home called her smart but cold, with a strong interest in chemistry and medicine, unusual for women of her group. They remembered times small animals on the plantation died strangely after Charlotte experimented with plant mixes. Formal charges against Charlotte Evangeline Whitmore came in September 1855. She faced first-degree murder for her husband and 30 more counts for other victims. The trial was set to be one of the biggest criminal cases in Antebellum, Mississippi, with newspapers across the South watching. But justice did not come. The night before jury selection, St. Arted, Charlotte was found dead in her cell at the Tunica County Jail. Officials said suicide by hanging, though odd things surrounded her death. The rope came from threads pulled from her dress, but knots looked too skilled for an upset woman. A small vial with traces of the same plant poison was hidden in her cell. How she got it in jail was never explained, leading some to think she had helpers who set up her death to stop bad secrets from coming out in court. The Magnolia Ridge tragedy stayed with Tunica County for generations. The plantation sold to pay debts and claims from victims' families. The main house stood empty for years before a Tennessee family bought it, but they never felt right there and tore it down in 1868. Local stories grew around the case, with some saying Charlotte used witchcraft or made a deal with dark forces. These ghostly ideas probably helped people understand a crime so coldly planned. The real story was likely simpler but just as scary. A young woman, pushed by need and greed, carried out mass murder with careful science. Investigation files went to Jackson when Mississippi set up its state archives, but many got lost during the Civil War when Union troops took the capital. What survives gives a broken but upsetting look at one of the Antebellum South's darkest moments. Dr. Hayes's last report, done months after Charlotte's death, said she probably planned the poisoning for weeks before coming to Magnolia Ridge. The amount of toxic plant material she had could have killed many more. His study showed only differences in guest sizes, and uneven mixing of poisoned syllabub stopped a bigger disaster. The case changed Mississippi's laws in surprising ways. Seeing how hard such crimes were to investigate, the state passed rules for better records of strange deaths and ways to handle big casualty events. These helped during later yellow fever outbreaks along the Mississippi River. Victims' families dealt with pain for years. The Morrison children went to relatives in Virginia, while the Caldwell twins grew up with grandparents. Many families left Mississippi, unable to face Delta memories. The money effects went beyond families. Several murdered guests were big landowners whose deaths hurt cotton work and local trade. Most troubling was knowing Charlotte's crime could have been stopped if Nathaniel told the truth about his child, if her father admitted money problems, or if anyone saw her dangerous interests. 32 people might have lived. Instead, lies and social rules set up perfect conditions for horror. Doctors learned too. Dr. Hayes wrote a full report on plant poison signs in a medical journal, helping others spot and treat similar cases. His work became a key guide for 19th-century toxicology, though he always regretted the high price of that knowledge. Old records hint at other odd deaths tied to Charlotte Whitmore. Natchez death lists before her marriage show unexplained cases among older people treated by a healer matching her description, but these links were never fully checked, leaving questions without answers. The case shook Mississippi society. That a proper young woman from a good family could do such planned murder challenged ideas about women's nature and class. Newspapers tried to explain how someone seeming to fit Southern lady ideals could hide such deadly plans. Churches felt it ply. The poisoning right after a Christian wedding, with a minister among victims, raised hard questions about God's care and evil in daily life. Many area churches held special prayer meetings after, seeking spiritual answers for the horror. Money companies, still new in the antebellum South, faced huge claims from the mass poisoning. This led to tougher rules on covering violent deaths and set examples for big casualty cases that shaped the business for years. Law experts saw the case as important for handling multiple murders from one act. The difficulty of proving intent in mass poisonings needed new legal ways that affected courts across the region. As the Civil War neared, the Magnolia Ridge case gained extra meaning. Some abolitionists used it to show moral rot in plantation life, while Southern supporters called it one person's evil, not a system problem. These views joined bigger talks about antebellum Southern life. Physical proof from the case got lost or destroyed. Preserved toxic plants were thrown out after Charlotte's death as too risky. Dr. Hayes's basic tools were simple, but his ideas about the poison type were later confirmed by better tests in similar cases. During Reconstruction, former Magnolia Ridge slaves gave more statements to Freedmen's Bureau workers. Their words, not in the first investigation, described Charlotte's odd actions long before the wedding, including testing plant mixes on small animals. The case shaped stories and local tales in the Mississippi Delta. Writers made up versions based on events, often adding ghostly parts that hid the real planned murder. These softer stories built a legend lasting into the 20th century, making it hard for historians to find pure facts. Schools later used the case to teach medical and law students. The hard toxicology proof and legal rules made it useful, though teachers always stressed the sad cost of the lessons. Law schools focused on problems when the main suspect dies before trial. Modern forensics would probably find more proof. Better chemical tests on remains, mind studies of the killer, and stronger methods might answer some open questions. But main facts stay clear. A young woman used science knowledge for mass murder over money, showing planning and lack of feeling that shocked even the rough society of antebellum Mississippi. The legacy of August 14, 1855, went far past Tunica County. It became a warning about arranged marriages, the need for honest talk between families, and how learning can turn to evil. It showed how easy big gatherings were for planned poisoning, leading to changes in food and drink handling at large events across the area. As time passed and direct memories faded, Magnolia Ridge became a sign of how fast happiness can turn to horror, how looks can fool, and how chasing wealth and position can twist even those who seem most proper and cultured. The old foundation stones of the Plantation house, slowly covered by kudzu and honeysuckle, stood as quiet reminders of 32 lives lost to one woman's planned greed. Most haunting, perhaps, was knowing that somewhere in Mississippi archives, filed and forgotten, rested the full truth about Charlotte Evangeline Whitmore, a truth that died with her in that jail cell, carrying its secrets to whatever judgment waited after death. The syllabub recipe she used that night was never found. Local families destroyed any like it, unable to think of making, even by chance, the drink that caused such pain to their community. Even today, when summer storms move over the Delta and wind stirs cotton fields where Magnolia Ridge once stood, older people say they still hear echoes of that wedding. Laughter and music before the quiet, toasts that became death, and dreams that died with guests who trusted Southern hospitality, never suspecting their hostess prepared their last meal, with hands as cold and careful as the Mississippi winter after that awful August night. The last investigation report, filed in December 1855 and sealed for 20 years, held one more upsetting fact. Among Charlotte's things, officials found a detailed journal recording her plans for the wedding massacre. Written in a neat, almost medical style, entries showed full planning and cold thinking behind her acts. Entries started 3 months before the wedding, soon after the marriage deal closed. Charlotte carefully studied the guest list, noting rich families and people who might challenge her future claims. She figured doses by guest body weights and practiced poison making on stray cats at the Whitmore place. Most shocking was her backup plans. The journal showed if mass poisoning failed to kill Nathaniel, she had other ways to end him in coming weeks. She also thought about surviving guests suspecting her, listing ways to shift blame and keep her act of sad innocence. The last entry, written wedding morning, had one chilling line: "Today I become a widow and an heiress. History will remember this day, though not as I will tell it." Sheriff Crawford chose to seal these records forever, thin, full details of Charlotte's planning too upsetting for people. Victims' families heard only that strong proof confirmed her guilt, sparing them knowing how carefully their loved ones were chosen for death. The case closed officially in 1856 with Charlotte's death, though questions stayed for those who lived through it. The Tunica County Courthouse burned in 1873, destroying most left evidence. Few remaining papers went to state archives, mostly ignored until historian Dr. Margaret Thornton found them in 1962 while studying antebellum crimes. Dr. Thornton's 1964 paper in the Journal of Southern Historical Studies brought fresh notice to the case, but did not solve its mysteries. Her work confirmed basic facts, but found no living relatives of Maine people for more details. Land where Magnolia Ridge stood turned to cotton fields in early 20th century farm changes. Local farmers sometimes found bits of china or iron from old plantation buildings, but these were usually thrown away as useless pieces of a past better left alone. In 1968, Mississippi Department of Archives and History did a final check of case files before permanent storage. They said the Magnolia Ridge wedding massacre was one of the most planned mass murders in American history, noted for its preparation and the high social standing of its doer. Reviewing historians said Charlotte Evangeline Whitmore used her era's social rules with deadly skill. Her seeming polish and learning gave perfect cover for murderous plans, while arranged marriage brought victims right to her. The case stands as a dark warning that evil can hide behind the most polite face. Today, the Magnolia Ridge site lies under a soybean field off Highway 61, marked only by a county historical sign from 1976. The marker says nothing about the wedding massacre, mentioning only the plantation's farm role in antebellum times. Local people seldom talk about what happened, and many new to the area never hear of the tragedy that once marked that part of Mississippi ground. The syllabub recipe died with Charlotte, and maybe that's good. Some knowledge is too risky to keep, some customs too spoiled to follow. The 32 victims of that August night in 1855 rest in cemeteries across the Delta. Their deaths remain a lasting sign that monsters can come from the most unlikely places, wearing the most harmless faces. In the end, Charlotte Evangeline Whitmore gained a kind of lasting fame she probably never wanted, not as a rich plantation wife, but as a warning story about the depths of human planning and cruelty. Her name still gets whispered in Tunica County, when summer heat grows thick and cotton fields lie quiet under the Delta sun, a reminder that some weddings end not with happiness and fresh starts, but with death and the sour taste of betrayal that lasts long after the last guest is buried and the final words spoken. The sound that still carries across those fields is not celebration laughter, but the awful, lasting silence of 32 lives ended by a bride who picked poison over love, planning over kindness, and murder over the plain truth that might have stopped it all.